The hardest area of the body to learn in PRI is by far the head and the neck, and that is covered in the cervical revolution course. And quite frankly, to try to go into even all the detail on videos is almost impossible. But I just want to give an idea of what may be going on, or what is going on. Essentially, when you're on your right foot, remember, PRI is walking and breathing. When you're on your right foot, your left pelvis is rotated forward and oriented to the right. Your torso counter-rotates back to the left. And because the left shoulder is higher than the right shoulder, your head and neck would be like this, which is not good, and we want to obviously keep an level line of sight. So our neck will side bend to the left, this being my left, and then rotating to the left. And that is what you should be when you're on your right foot. But again, when you switch over to your left foot, if you're still in this position and you haven't gone to the opposite position, that's when you're no longer alternating. That's when you're not walking and breathing like a human being. So what you see is pelvis over to the right. Now this green muscle is the internal oblique on the left side. The green means it's weak and turned off, because when the pelvis falls forward and the ribs then have to rotate back to the left, the ribs also rise, which creates space between the ribs on the left side and the pelvis on the left side, which weakens those obliques. So green is, it's out of commission, it's weak. The opposite is happening on the right. The ribs on the right, to counter-rotate back to the left, the ribs go down, and now the pelvis on the right side and the ribs on the right side are closer together, so these obliques and the diaphragm actually, internal obliques and diaphragm, are overactive, and they're keeping those ribs and the pelvis closer together. Now the interesting thing is what happens at the neck, and again, this is the hardest thing to figure out, and reading it doesn't make it that much easier. You really have to visualize it, and having a skeleton. Now this skeleton does not move very well. However, I think you can get kind of an idea of what's going on. When you're like so, in order to get upright, the neck has to bend to the left and counter-rotate to the left to stay straight. In that position, you're going to have a couple things go on. First, in particular, this is the SCM, sternocleidomastoid. And these placements are approximate. I'm using construction paper here, so it's approximate. The sternocleidomastoid goes from the mastoid process, which is part of the temporal bone. And remember, the temporal bone is part of the TMJ joint. So a lot of TMJ dysfunction is really temporal bone dysfunction, which is really tied to what's going on in the neck. The neck muscles are the biggest players in a lot of TMJ issues. This sternocleidomastoid is overactive on the right side. So it goes sternum and the clavicle, and it attaches on the sternocleidomastoid. I'm sorry, on the mastoid process. And because of the position of the neck is being pulled down constantly as we counter-rotate, because we can't get out of this position. Even when we go to the left, we're still in this position. If we were able to alternate, it wouldn't be a problem, because now this part could open up, I'm sorry, this part could close down and it could open up on this side. However, that's not happening. We're stuck, always. So this SCM gets tight. Now you also have, let me move this closer, scalene, anterior scalene, right where my finger is. It goes from the first rib and it attaches to, I believe, cervical vertebrae 3 through 6, so somewhere 3 through 6. And when that gets overactive, especially when we're trying to breathe, that can pull the first rib up towards the clavicle, and it can get tight, and that can then throw off all your breathing mechanics and make everything quite miserable. So you'll also find a tight anterior scalene, which is also holding the base of the neck this way, and then from on up, it curves back to the other direction. So you're being held to the right. And then you also have, you can't really see it, but right underneath here, from the first rib to the clavicle, you have the subclavius, so underneath the clavicle. And that will also, because of the position that it gets put in, let me see if I can get it closer. There it is. Again, it's approximate. That also can hold that first rib close to the clavicle. And that can wreak havoc on the shoulder joint because now everything is mispositioned. And sometimes you'll have to manually release that subclavius. I had to do that myself because everything I was doing was working slightly but not perfectly, and it was because this subclavius, I couldn't release it. So in PRI, a lot of times you have to manually release that in one way or another, and that will then enable proper. Well, actually, no. There's further steps that you have to go through to get proper rib rotation and thus breathing, but I can't get into that in this video. The important thing to realize is what happens at the neck. You have a neck that is actually oriented to the right. It has to side bend and rotate back to the left, and that positions all these muscles on this side into a tightened position, and that is effectively the right tmcc, right tempo-mandibular cervical chain of muscles that postural restoration talks about. We have to inhibit the right side and turn on the left side. And it has to be done with help from these obliques to get you back up to the left so that these can turn off.